Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you. It's been a minute. I know that's mostly my fault. We'll talk about that. Well, actually, let's talk about that on the front end. This is an impromptu video, by the way, as many of them are. I find it's weird. Whenever I go for a run, I almost always have an idea for a video whenever I get back, and I haven't been for a run for a while. So maybe that's one of the reasons why my brain's been a little bit applesauce. But I think part of it's been, if I had to be honest with you guys, and I do owe you an apology. I've been sulking lately. I think I've been a little bit down and out of it, and I think that's because I'm not real thrilled with some of the conclusions I'm reaching in terms of kind of what comes next and what's necessary and where we are. And so I think there's a part of me that's just been trying to like avoid that. But, there's a lot of people who are, subscribed to my YouTube or part of my locals or follow me on Twitter or whatever. And I owe you more than just being a pouty little bitch about, where we are. We got to get moving. And that includes me. So mea culpa, I'm sorry. But I'm getting, an object at rest stays at rest. An object in motion stays in motion, right? So I'm getting back in motion. It feels good. So with that out of the way, I want to kind of go over just some of the things that I'm observing and noticing and just kind of run some of this by you in terms of like some of the things, I guess, that are informing the way I'm thinking about where we're at right now. And I'll get into the details of that here in a second. I'll tell you just as anecdotally, right? So I live in a really red state. Now, the city I live in is more blue. My county actually narrowly went for Biden in a very, very red state, but I think it's one of the few, if not the only county that did. Now, of course, it's no coincidence that there's a university. In fact, the only four-year university in my state is in the city I live in. So I think that those are not coincidence. There's definitely I would say a causal relationship there in a lot of ways, but I don't want to get into that. Although I will say, so I went for a run and I wanted to go up and one, I was like, I just need to get out and get moving. Maybe that'll help me clear my head, which it did. And the movie theater that is closest to us, well, I guess actually there's only one now. It's about a little over a mile away. And so I wanted to run up there to get tickets for Godzilla vs. Kong, which I'm going to go see on Saturday. I'm pretty excited about. But campus is only a few blocks from me. It's a pretty campus. And so I wanted to run through there. And I noticed, there's these big banners that say, face coverings are required at all times, even when you're outdoors. Of course, I wasn't wearing one while I was running, nor would I. And there was, so every single person I passed either put their mask on quickly when they saw me coming, deviated off of the sidewalk, or gave me a dirty look if they were kind of, not in my direct path. And that was for almost a mile of just that. And I saw other people like walking together and all of them had the masks on. And it's interesting to me to go from, if you listened to me a year ago when I was railing against the people who are anti-mask, I was like, this is intuitively correct. Of course, this is a good thing. And the conclusion I've reached now on the anti-maskers is that they were just early. Like they were right, but at the wrong time, to say that the masks were about control. I think it's become that, but I don't think that it was necessarily the correct conclusion, last April, for example. That's neither here nor there. So I experienced that, and I did give me the conclusion that I think universities are a shimmer within a shimmer, that all the universities are a hive mind in the same, and then that shimmer effect that I've talked about before. I use the example from the movie or book Annihilation. And that's this area that distorts reality, and those who are inside of it don't realize that they're part of a reality distortion. And that the shimmer effect, I think, maybe went from the universities to the metropolitan areas. And that's why the metropolitan areas are also now a hive mind shimmer effect where they're all governed the same. The cities are. But anyway, that's an entirely different thing. So I've been thinking a lot, and I use that example of me seeing those people and the people giving me dirty looks and who are, wearing the mask outside. I saw this last weekend we went, there's went to a grand opening of a business here in town. We've had so many businesses open where I live during the pandemic. It's crazy, and is I think probably very illustrative of the difference in governance in places that we've had bars open, we've had restaurants open, we've had sporting goods stores. The friend of mine who had a business that opened, he does leather. He built this from the ground up by himself, and now has a big storefront, and it's really cool. Anyway, but we were there, and downtown, like I said, the county I live in is fairly blue, or at least a good mix, maybe close to evenly split. So I would see people walking with their kids, 4-year-olds wearing masks outside, and it's like when there's no one around and stuff. And so what I've been thinking about is like a numbers game. So if I were to say, and I know this is kind of a crude way of thinking about it, but go with me for a minute. Are those folks part of the solution or part of the problem? And I know that's a black and white binary. Okay, I get that. But if we were to say that the problem could loosely be described as far-left orthodoxy's ideological takeover of our institutions and our society, and its narratives and beliefs becoming the dominant narratives and beliefs that are basically the only accepted thought. And part of that, what's baked into that, is authoritarian control, usurping of liberties, and silencing and demonizing and ousting of anyone with dissent or even doubt. If we were to say that's the problem, are the people who are putting masks on their 4-year-olds and while walking outside by themselves part of the solution or part of the problem? Because it has become just that thing, and that's not what this video is about. This isn't about masks, but that has become a marker of you're either a good person or not. Like, it is absolutely a signaling. And I'm not even going to say virtue signaling. It's an allegiance signaling. Virtue signaling, I think, is overdone. It's which team I'm on for that. So I've been thinking a lot about numbers game. And I made this little thing on the whiteboard for Zoom here before I got started. I'm really glad that it saved it. I was worried that it wasn't going to save it. So here's one of the things I'm thinking about. Okay. And this is one of the conclusions that I reached whenever I was visiting family and friends in Kansas City a week or so ago. So if you were to say, hopefully this isn't inverted for you, right is right for me and left is left. I hope it doesn't switch it. But so I had this black line down the middle. That's just represents what I would say middle of the road governance, public opinion. It's a good mix of things that are, conservative, liberal, whatever you want to say. And then the arrows represent people that are pulling us in those ideological directions. And I put the X, that's supposed to represent kind of where I think we are right now in terms of governance on just a general scale. Obviously, different states have different governance. But just, I would say on average that we're pretty far over from the center to the left. And not just that, but also like, where's the Overton window? What are the accepted ideas? What is the accepted correct opinions about things, for example? So there are different, I'm not even trying to make this about like institutions, because there are some institutions where the X is way farther to the left in terms of accepted opinions and stuff. But I'm just trying to give a general average. This is only about numbers of individual peoples, okay? Individual people and citizens. And just for the sake of this, we'll say in the United States. But I think in the West, you could extrapolate out to the West more broadly. So the question is, if we were going to conceptualize this as a game of tug of war. Tug of war is basically a numbers game, or at the very least, it's a strength and momentum game, right? So you have people on a rope, on one side, one on the other, and they're pulling, and if you have, and let's say they're all of identical strength, and you have 5 people on one side and 10 people on the other side. The side with 10 is going to win, right? They're going to successfully defeat the 5 and pull them over to their side. And so this is, I'm trying to use a picture to display a dynamic of a tug of war game, right? And so my point is that there are forces on one side that are either actively pulling or contributing to the momentum of those who are pulling. Okay. And then obviously forces on the other side. So the question I want to ask is, where's the momentum? Which side has the numbers, and which side has more people, A, in power, and B, dedicated to winning / advancing their ideology? And I hit a little bit on this during the Ember episode we recorded the other day. I progressively drank more whiskey throughout it, so I don't remember how much I got into. I hope that it made sense generally, but that's another thing. But the point is I'm trying to figure out, like, if we're just going to think about this from a pure numbers game and like force differentials on those on either side, like, where are we at? Because we have to try and figure out how bad this is, right? There are people who I think are in varying degrees of panic's not the right word, but somber. Maybe people who are just really take this seriously. Dedicated is not a great word, but it's a one I'll use for now. Like, there are some people that are way more sanguine about this, I guess, than others. So I went down the list and I put red obviously represents a conservative perspective. Purple is more of, could be either, and then blue is people who might lean to the left. So here's the way I've been thinking about it lately. Okay, pure numbers game. So there are people who are sympathetic to flow, far-left orthodoxy. The people who they want to be considered, good, and they think that this is about. So a good example, I talked to someone a few weeks ago. It was the longest, most exhausting conversation I've had in a long time. And they said, being woke is just being a good person. And I was like, there's that Jim Carrey gif, it's like that. But there's people like that, right, who are sympathetic to this, who think that this is just that they hear the word anti-racist and they actually code that in as being against racism. Like, these are the same people who might hear anti-fascism and go, yeah, I'm anti-fascist, anyway. So I would say those are contributing to the momentum, if not pulling, on the rope for flow. We'll say this side's flow and the other side is like opposition to it. Then there's the true believers. Now, this is a small group, but it's a growing group. The people who are really dedicated, the people who are like, yes, Green New Deal, yes, new Constitution, yes, let's get rid of the filibuster, yes, let's increase the minimum wage ad infinitum, cancel student debt, and so on. So all these other just batshit insane ideas, they think that all this is good. Like, there is the thing on Twitter, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where people were saying there was people legitimately making the argument that if a black person attacks an Asian person, it's because of white supremacy. It's like, how crazy do you have to be? Like, that is insane. That is nuts. But that's true believer. That's why this is a religion. Anyway, there's good liberals playing into the Mott and Bailey rhetoric, right? So if you're unfamiliar with Mott and Bailey, it's, so you have, it's funny. Whenever I hear that word in my head, I always think of this game I used to play, like a real-time strategy game on like a computer in like 1998, where it was a type of defense that you could build for your medieval kingdom. And this guy would always say Mott and Bailey. So that's how I always hear it in my head. But it really was a way that they would plan out their communities. So you would have, like, maybe on a hill, ideally, and they'd build like a tower, and that was the Mott, and the Bailey was the village around it. And the Bailey is the Mott's a defensible position. The Bailey's not defensible, right? And so if anyone came, if there was any attackers, they could see them, and then they would run up into the Mott and rain arrows down on them. And Mott and Bailey is a thing. I always go back to this as an explanation, because this is where, like, I've seen this like textbook Mott and Bailey. So back when people were talking about abolish the police last summer during all the riots that were going on around the US, I knew I had names in my head of people that were going to be like, they would hear that, they would go, that's my side's idea, so I'm going to adopt it uncritically, and I'm going to immediately try and find ways to make that be a defensible position. So the Bailey, the undefensible part is, yeah, no, we really want to abolish the police. There's lots of people saying that, like, no, we really do want to abolish the police. And then there was people who were, going up and trying to build this Mott, this defensible version of that statement, which is, well, don't you think we need police reform? Abolish the police doesn't mean actually getting rid of them, or defund the police doesn't mean actually defunding the police. It means giving them more training. Like it means giving them more funding, which is again counterintuitive and insane. But that's the Mott and Bailey thing. So there's all these good liberals. Jesse Singal is a good example. God, I just realized I don't, that would just like rolled off the tongue. I don't like calling people out specifically. Sam Harris would maybe be a good example since I've already done it. Or people on the left who still want to view these things very charitably. John Haidt is there, unfortunately. I think Christine Hoff Sommers might be doing this some, but these are people that have really good ideas and understand these things well. And so this isn't necessarily a criticism of their character or anything, but they want to view like all of this crap as charitably as possible, or they still have, and I should have put this here, but they still don't see it, they see it as less of a threat than conservatism, or to use a more rudimentary example, than Donald Trump, right? Or Trumpism, MAGA type thing. And so they would say, well, yeah, the woke people, those people they're crazy, but they're not near as bad as this fascist, authoritarian, Nazi, whatever, that we can just simply vote out of power. Anyway. But those people are absolutely contributing to the momentum of flow, of far-left orthodoxy. There's also fearful centrists. I would say this is people center-right, center-left, who don't go along with it. But these are the people who, whenever you hear someone like Carlin or James Lindsay or Dave Rubin or Chris Rufo or any of them who like actually understand this stuff, who they say all the time, or Gad Saad's another example. I get emails. This is like a template of a thing you hear these people say, right? I get emails all the time of people saying, this is going on, but I'm too afraid to speak up. What should I do? Right? So these are the people who are quiet, and they remain silent whenever this ideology is even being at least on some level debated, let's say at their in their schools or at their workplace, or maybe in their religious organization. So an example, here's one. So Kevin from Engineering Politics, which you should sub to if you haven't already, he went to it was a virtual school board meeting, or PTO meeting. And because they were talking about adopting Ibram Kendi's anti-racism crap for these kids. And he spoke out against it. And all these parents were private messaging him like, I agree, but I'm too afraid to say something, right? Well, what happens whenever no one says anything, right? If Kevin didn't say anything there, which he did, Kevin had the nuts to do it, or as Gad Saad would say, the testicular fortitude. Consensus, the perception of consensus is created in the absence of dissent, right? So here would be another example. Let's say that someone went out in the streets where I live or where you live and was just waving a Nazi flag and saying, Hail Hitler and everything. And no one said anything to them. They were walked up and down the street and no one said anything to them. That would give you the impression, it's like, really, does no one around here care about this? Like, it would seem like there is a default consensus around that obviously evil ideology, just because no one was saying anything otherwise. No one's expressing doubt or dissent or giving any pushback. So my point is that in these contexts, there is a false idea of consensus through the silence of people who are choosing not to speak out about it. And there is some merit to, people on the left will use this idea of complicity. Silence is violence or whatever. That's obviously wrong specifically, but as a general principle of, if we've heard this, here's a more nuanced and maybe more identifiably sane version of this, but evil prevails when good men fail to act, right? This is an old saying that we understand, that basically whenever evil is running roughshod over all of society, when good people do nothing about it, they're letting it happen. They're contributing to it. That's why you can actually be charged for crimes if you could have done something and you don't. You can be charged as an accomplice. So my point is, and I know that sounds like kind of inflamed and hyperbolic in some ways, but it's a base level true is all I'm getting at, is that the people who have a chance to speak up when they could speak up, when it would matter, and don't, are contributing to the momentum of this thing. That's all I'm getting at. Then there's right-wingers ignorant to the extent of the problem. This is one that my eyes were really open to a few weeks ago. Is I spoke to multiple people who were at a varying ages, different stages of life, in different fields or different work, different vocations, who would be able to articulate that this stuff is bad. When I say this stuff, flow generally, right? That it is bad, that it is harmful, that it needs to be stopped, and that was it. That was it. There was no thing beyond that. And I realized that there's a large contingent on the right, and it really, and I posted about this on my locals and I think on Rubens as well, but it does help illuminate a little bit of what you've heard, like Dave Rubin and Carlin, for example. Those are two people who are like, why are the conservatives not saying anything? Like, why aren't they doing anything? Like, we're from the left, we're fighting this fight. Like, what the hell are you guys doing? Like, you're just benching yourself. What's going on? And obviously that's a general, I'm not saying all conservatives, not at all. I'm just saying there's a large group within the right, or people who've maybe historically voted Republican, who would say all those things, but they think that the extent in which they are pushing back or fighting it is complaining about it on Facebook or sharing memes about Hillary being, a criminal and killing people, or Joe Biden being senile and voting Republican every 2 years, if that, maybe every 4 years. And that's what they think that that's it. Whenever I posted on Rubin's thing about, my idea that our Republicans just used to losing and they're used to everything being called socialism, that they don't understand that we're actually looking at it right now. And so that's why they're not fighting back as hard. And I had a lot of people who got really salty with me who were like, well, we just want to be left alone and live our lives. And we have jobs. And it's like, okay, like, that's fine. I understand and I agree with those things. But what are you actually doing to try and fight this stuff in your community or otherwise? Like, like, again, the reality is this stuff is everywhere. Everyone has a way in which they could push back against it, even if it's the simplest way, like looking whenever people post, hey, email this congressman, come and sign this petition or whatever. Like, those are the bare minimum things. And even that, a lot of people on the right aren't doing. So I'm not trying to say this in like any way that's inflammatory or like trying to be a dick about it, but I'm saying there are a lot of people on the right who I think don't understand what we're dealing with. They don't understand what we're dealing with. They're used to everything being called socialism. Obama was called a socialist Muslim who was going to destroy America. And then, what happened? Yeah, I mean, we had Obamacare and we had, some things from a government standpoint that weren't awesome, but America basically remained America. And especially if you lived in rural America or in some insular community, even if that was within a metropolitan area, it really didn't seem like much changed. And so my point is that I think there's a lot of people on the right who are coding this in, where we're at now is just, this is the same culture war. This is the same thing. This is the same as, Obama, or this is the same as Clinton even. This is the same as violence in video games and rap music and porn and whatever else. And they don't realize that it's not the same, because all of the institutional power is now on the side of far left orthodoxy. All of it. That is not the case, or that wasn't the case 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. Not at all. But it is now. It is now. And I don't think they see that. And then my point is that they're like the fearful centrists, that their lack of doing anything and lack of, their understanding of what it looks like to push back is so completely not well calibrated to the situation we're in, that they are effectively contributing to the momentum of how this thing's advancing, just due to the fact that they're benching themselves, even though they might not realize it. And then I put literally everyone else who just wants to be left alone, is afraid, uninformed, bullied into silence, or cares more about relationships than the truth. That last one can seem a little bit touchy, but I think we all know that on some level that most people have experienced relational tension because of this. I've experienced it. It sucks. It sucks really bad. And it can become really difficult where it's like, okay, if I do push back and this becomes like a public thing, is this going to hurt these relationships? And there are people who are like, it's just too uncomfortable. I've seen lesser things destroy the integrity of good people than this. And so I just, like, again, this is just a question of, it's not necessarily people who are pulling, but people who might be contributing energy to the pulling of the rope farther to the left, just because they're standing around and not pulling to the right. Does that make sense? And so, because the question isn't who is necessarily actively pulling, but who is just there, because everyone in some way is, I sound like Ibram Kendi, right? There's either racism or anti-racism, which is of course crazy, but everyone in some way is contributing to the momentum behind flow or opposing flow. Like, I don't think there's much neutral happening here, because it's not static. It's a dynamic thing. It is actively trying to take over things. It's actively trying to push its policies on us. It's actively trying to indoctrinate your kids, lie to you through propaganda in the media and the cathedral, which is a term that I love and I'm going to adopt now after reading Michael Malice's book. You should totally read it if you haven't. But the point is that this thing's active. If it was static and it wasn't moving, then that would be one thing, right? But it's actively trying to encroach on all of our lives, whether we realize it or not. Some people maybe sooner than others, depending on where you work, what you do, for example, but it is active. And so my point is that if you're not actively opposing it, then it's that, bystander effect where you're just standing there and like, well, surely someone will do something. And so who's on the other side of this? I'd say former lefties who understand this thing. That's someone like me, Carlin Bursinko, Dave Rubin, James Lindsay. I think Brett Weinstein's getting there. Eric Weinstein, maybe. I haven't seen anything from Eric for a while. I think Barry Weiss would probably be in there. And there's some overlap here because she would also be in like the handful of principled left-leaning journalists, for example. But so there's former lefties who understand this, and those are the ones who are on the forefront of this. I put below that conservative culture warriors, kinda. That's more the Ben Shapiro type. And I'm cooling to their, I guess, importance or impact on the society, because they're largely speaking to people who agree with them. I don't think a lot of people are woken up by Ben Shapiro saying facts don't care about your feelings, or Matt Walsh tweeting out something incendiary for no reason, even if I might agree with the things that they're saying. Although in Matt Walsh's case, not usually. With the cultural stuff, he's usually right on whenever it comes to philosophical things. But his hot takes on like movies are so wrong all the time that I'm convinced it's on purpose. But anyway, but my point is I put them as kinda, but I think that they're part of the group that are like the traditional right who's accustomed to losing, and who might not necessarily understand this thing, but because of where they've just placed themselves, like Ben Shapiro is fighting against this stuff, right? Like he tries to do debates, he talks to people, he goes and does these talks, and where people can ask him questions, says if you disagree with me, go to the front of the line. So credit for that. I don't think his tactic is very effective, but he's at least doing it. He's at least trying to steer stuff. And whenever I first started waking up to a lot of these things, watching a few Ben Shapiro videos of him just saying things that I didn't know how to put words to was really useful to me. Now, someone and other things had to, not someone, but just other events were like, I guess, preceded that. And so as I was trying to figure out, okay, well, who might be able to say something that would make some sense since I'm living in a sea of crazy? And he was one of those people. So my point is that even though I rag on Shapiro, and I think there's a lot of valid criticisms of people like him, they aren't doing nothing. They're not on the sidelines. They are actively building new institutions, which that is a thing I'm warming to. I used to say I don't like what they're doing with making movies and media and stuff, but I'm actually not unconvinced that that's not necessary. So anyway, but that's the thing I'm evolving on. I'm still trying to figure that out. So there are those people, but who have kind of always been in that space, right? Ben's always been in that space. Rush Limbaugh was someone who was in that space, right? Anyway, so that's my point. Tucker Carlson, always in that space. There's MAGA, right? So this is, and I didn't really know, I would maybe broaden that out to just the populist right, because they're not really the right. That includes, like I said, a lot of people who are on the left previously and who might still hold a lot of those values, but who voted for Trump and understood that like governance under Trump, for all of its flaws, was way better than what we were facing. And so the MAGA movement has been ardently against, far-left orthodoxy. I think there's some ways in which there's some excesses there. And I hate that I'm not even going to do that disclaimer. Everyone knows there's excesses everywhere. But the point is that people who are, you could broadly say under the MAGA umbrella, are people who are pulling the rope and trying to say, let's not do that crap. So there's that. And then a handful of principled left-leaning journalists. I mentioned Barry Weiss. I think Matt Taibbi is also in that. And there's some others. And so like those are people who are actively fighting against this stuff as well through good journalism. It's not common, but it is there. But look at people like Taibbi and Weiss, where they had to go to Substack, right? they got pushed out of their institutions. I read Barry Weiss's resignation letter from the New York Times. And maybe that's part of the creation of new institutions. But my point is back to the question, which side has the momentum, which side has the numbers, and which side has more people in power and / dedicated to winning / advancing their ideology. It seems to me that it's a wash for the left right now. That if we were to break this down as a pure numbers game, that far-left orthodoxy has the momentum. They have the institutions, they have the power, they have the credentialing, even though our credentialing system is totally broken. They have that. And then there's people on the right and in the middle who just through not understanding this or their own cowardice, and I say that in the most sanitized way possible. Like, I'm not saying they are cowards, they're horrible people. I'm just saying through their own fear of speaking out about this stuff are contributing to its momentum, right? Because this, like I said, this thing is dynamic. It is moving. And so if you have opportunities to throw rocks in its path, or as James Lindsay would call sand in the gears, if you have an opportunity to do that and you don't, and you back up because you don't want to draw attention to yourself, then you're contributing to it because you are opting not to slow it down when you might be able to do that. Because again, I think one of the main problems we have is the false perception of consensus behind this stuff. And that false perception of consensus comes from the fact that doubt and question asking has not been normalized. If we can normalize doubt and question asking in the public space and just public discourse around this ideology, that goes a long way to fighting it. But the way we do that is through people asking questions and people expressing doubt. So that's why I've been conceptualizing this from a pure numbers game standpoint. And then, okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And I want to read to you something, just an excerpt from something. This is 8 pages long. I wrote this, I think, over 2 years ago. I had all these thoughts and observations. This is when I coined the term flow, far-left orthodoxy. And I just put this down. And I might publish this just so you guys can read it and see. And this, like I said, this is something that I was thinking about over 2 years ago. But I called it Current Cultural Trends and Current Cultural Observations and Trends and Overview. And I called it, What is Flow? Understanding the West's Most Deadly Contemporary Threat. So I'm going to read to you the thesis and at the very beginning, and then maybe an excerpt from the end, because I think that what I lay out here remains the problem. So thesis, unless a new dialectic approach is implemented by the opposition, current trends toward the acceptance of far-left orthodoxy will continue culturally, resulting in the election of radicals or those espousing radical legislation, and the nearly irreversible legislation of authoritarian and collectivist policies. The loose yet instructive application and observation of Moore's law in rapid cultural shifts over the past decade, radical and rapid changes on immigration policies, gender, etc., underscore the urgency of this problem. The dialectic problem is twofold. One, conversion, via faith-like acceptance or silent acquiescence of this new religious flow. Two, branding, issue of non-flow ideas versus flow ideology, ideas, and cultural stances. So the point, and then I go to lay out what I called the who is flow, who are the people that we have this dialectic problem with. And so what I was getting at there is this thing has the momentum. Again, this is over 2 years ago. This thing has momentum and the power behind it. And if we don't come up with a new way of engaging with this dialectically, or at least engaging with the ideas dialectically, so that we can wake others up to this, of how corrupt and morally bankrupt this ideology is, then it's going to keep winning. And I said right there, it's going to win elections, and it's going to keep implementing radical policies, and it's going to keep implementing authoritarian policies. Like, I didn't even have COVID stuff in mind, but that's where we're at. That's what was going on. And I'm saying that, like, we have two issues here. One is this thing makes converts, and we're not thinking about it in that way. Like, the people who are this large plurality that's growing of people that are buying into this, or at least a little bit, who are warming to these ideas, they're being converted in a religious way. And we have to think about it as dealing with converts, like potential religious converts, or people who are in the process of maybe going through like a, some type of one of those classes that you take, confirmation class or something that a church would do. The people who are going down this road, it's a religious thing. And so we don't have a, at least right now, a properly calibrated lexicon to deal with the issues on that level. And then the other is branding. Like I said, there is that all of the ideas on flow, and I go into it in the essay. I probably will. I'll put it on Medium. I'll try to edit it and look at it and see if I can put it out there. But all the ideas that flow has, check all the boxes of ideas that are sticky and like shareable. So I quote like Jonah Berger from his book Contagious, and Chip and Dan Heath, who wrote Made to Stick. And I think they have another book that's in a similar vein. But the point is that the ideas on that side have all the moral, they check all the moral boxes and all of the boxes for an idea that works in the marketplace. And there's nothing the opposition has that's a good counter to that. That's my point. And what I said at the end, let me go to the end. So I said we have a conversion issue, dialectic issue, or a branding issue. Let me scroll down here. Okay, so I said summary and implications. The most recent generation and incoming generation of voters are bent towards authoritarianism, even if they do not realize it. The members of Gen Z who label themselves conservative contain a majority that desire more government action to solve problems, not less. This alone demonstrates the uphill battle to be fought for what is increasingly the majority bloc of voters. Looked at as potential religious recruits to the religion of flow, they are primed to go along to get along, if for no better reason than to prevent the fallout which comes from blasphemy against flow. They might even truly convert due to lack of religion and purpose increasingly found among the youngest generation. The outcome is the same: the adherence or complicity in the spread of flow. There is no counter movement to flow that has the same mainstream appeal and purpose-filling potential that flow currently has. And so my point then was, this thing has all of the momentum. This has all of the power behind it, and the numbers. And if we don't come up with a way to boost our numbers, then we're screwed. And I'm seeing that now, and I think COVID elucidates that more and more, as you see the people who are willing to go, yeah, take my freedoms. Yeah. Trust the science. Wait, what's the science again? Oh, 2 masks. What about 5? 3 condoms? Like, you know what I'm saying? So we're seeing how, I guess, vulnerable we are from that numbers standpoint, is my point. Is that the people who are putting masks on 4-year-olds when they're out walking, they might even be traditionally voting Republican or something, but there's just so many avenues in which this thing can get its tendrils in you that it seems insurmountable. So anyway, the last thing I'll say, and then I'll kind of wrap it up and kick it to you guys for your thoughts, is I want to go back to that idea about the people on the right who I think may think that they're opposing this, or they think they understand it, but they really don't. Whenever I did ministry, there was a saying that we would use quite often that was, emotion is no substitute for action. Action is no substitute for production. And production is no substitute for reproduction. And the point is that just having feelings about something is not the same as doing something about it. And acting on those feelings isn't the same as doing something useful, right? So an example would be, let's say you have you're opposed to whatever thing, and instead of trying to do something meaningful, you like send death threats to progressive legislators. Like, that'd be an example of emotion that turned into action that was not productive action. In fact, it was counterproductive action. So not all action is productivity. Sharing memes about how Joe Biden is a dementia patient isn't productive action. Now, there is a very, very, very valuable role for humor when you're engaging with people who agree with flow. Okay, humor is necessary there. Just among your friends who agree with it, it's like, yeah, he is a dementia patient. It's like, okay, what'd you accomplish? So humor in the right context is crucial, not just good, but crucial. But it's sharing memes about Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton or whatever. That's That's action, but not production. Production is something useful, something meaningful, something that actually produces an effect, a positive effect, a desirable effect, right? So like what Carlin's doing in New Hampshire would be one of those examples. Deb Philman on the Reason We Learn channel is fantastic. Again, if you haven't subbed to it, she talks about this stuff in education and gives actual resources and talking points for people. So that is production. That is good, and it's reproduction. So the next part, going from production to reproduction, can sound maybe confusing. The point is production is doing something. Reproduction is doing something on an iterative level, like repeating that thing. So if you talk to anyone who like their salary is based on donations, they would say, I would much rather have reoccurring monthly donations than someone giving a one-time gift. So that's my point, is that just going out, here's an example of production that's not like being reproduced, that's not continually opposing this stuff. Going out and voting Republican, which again, I think is probably one of the most low res forms of opposition here, but it does count. It does count, at least right now, it does count. But that's not, but if you just do that, then you do nothing at any other point in time while this stuff takes over your school district or takes over your workplace or your state legislation or legislature or anything like that, then you were productive the one time, but then you didn't do anything. It wasn't reproductive. People, like I said, like Deb, who are doing that stuff. Vesper talks about the stuff in the art world. It's really good. That would be another example of it's reproduced. They're doing it over and over again. Their opposition is continual, not like a one-time thing, right? So that's my point, is that we have to get to a place where we have numbers, where we're waking people up through proper branding. I think so much of this is rooted in the dialectic, because that's how this thing gained ascendancy, is through hijacking language in a lot of ways. But we have to get people through proper branding. But I think that's actually secondary to the religious, the making converts thing, to be honest. And once we do that, then we have to get them at a place where it's reproducing. Like they're like, yeah, no, I do understand this. And I understand that literally anywhere that I can, again, to quote James, sand in the gears, throw a rock in front of it, put my foot out, so it can trip, whatever. Like if I'm not thinking about how can I be opposing this stuff, then, I'm probably not doing as much as I could do, because I'm starting to, I think one of the conclusions, like I said at the beginning, is I think that we are in a lot worse shape than I'd originally realized. And I'm someone who is generally very pessimistic and cynical about things. One of the movie quotes that I've used in a lot of things that I've written and videos I made, was at the end of Seven, when Morgan Freeman says, Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a good place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part. And I've said, like, that's a good mantra. That's what, how I think about these things. But I think even despite my previous maybe pessimism or concern, like, it's getting worse. I'm realizing, okay, no, we are actually in a pretty dangerous spot right now, very dangerous. And again, at a base level, we have to have some type of ideologically insurgent movement, and you need numbers for that. We have to normalize doubt. We have to normalize question asking. You can't do that without numbers. We have to have enough people raising these questions within their social circles, whether it's at work, their families, with their friends, faith community, whatever. You play intramural sports. I don't know if you're on a pickup softball league. I don't care. My point is that people we have to normalize that question asking, normalize that doubt. And again, that's a numbers game. And so the few of us who are trying to pull the rope back towards sanity, I'm not saying pull it all the way over to the right or anything like that. I'm just saying, let's get back to a place of some type of sanity in how we're thinking about things. Like, we have to also be thinking about how we wake people up to this stuff. If it's even possible to wake up enough people in the amount of time that we have, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that either. But anyway, those are the things I've been thinking about. And so I would love your feedback on that. And I know I've talked about this stuff before, but it's like, we haven't solved it yet. We haven't solved it yet, guys. We haven't figured it out. More people are waking up, but it's like, okay, how many people are waking up because other people woke them up to this stuff? Or how many people just had that, quote, woke breaking point where they had something happen where they just, they did the Neo thing and they just emerged from the Matrix. Wait, no, that wasn't Neo. That was a different guy in the Animatrix. If you watch the Animatrix, there's people that just came out of the Matrix on their own. So like, what's the percentage of people that were actually had their eyes open through relationships versus this thing just came knocking at their door in a way that they saw it, like they saw what was underneath of it. They're like, oh, it's not this angelic visage of justice and love. There's a monster underneath there, and they saw it, and then they woke up, and then they found their respective alliances afterwards. So I don't know what the answer is there. But here is the last thing I'll say. Okay, I am actually going to end it here. But this is a example that I use that I've been thinking about, I think maybe since like October or something like that. I remember I told Carlin about this whenever I saw her in Omaha. But I've been thinking about this idea of, I call it synthesis, and how like the opposition we do have is very disparate, and it's separated and spread out. So we have to bring more people in to fighting this stuff, and we have to figure out what's the best, most productive and efficient means of doing that. And how do we unite the people who are opposed, right? Because again, let's take the example of, if you watched the live stream, it was Jesse Singal, Brett Weinstein, and James Lindsay, and they're talking about who they voted for. And politics is the most low res way of understanding this stuff, but it's good enough for what we're talking about right now. And so these are all three people who totally agree that this super far left stuff is, from an ideological standpoint, is dangerous. It is harmful, and it needs to be opposed. But you have James, who's like, yeah, I voted for Trump. I'm not happy about it, but I'm going to keep voting red until we can stop this stuff, because the Democratic Party's become beholden to this. And so we have to do whatever it takes to fight it. And then there's Brett, who's like, I couldn't bring myself to do either. And so I wrote in Tulsi Gabbard. And so it's like, okay, well, what did you accomplish? Like, good for you. Maybe you can sleep better, but whatever. And then there's Jesse Singal, who is, again, he understands this stuff, but he's naive to the extent at which it's a threat. And I think he's also naive, or deluded is maybe a better term, about the extent at which, the conservatives are the worst bad guys. If you look at the Harper's letter, where all those people signed, it had like Noam Chomsky and others on it, and it was all people on the left. They had to put like a whole paragraph about how, look, those dirty conservatives, they're scary too. They're real scary. Like, we want to criticize some stuff on the left, so we have to make sure we dedicate a whole section of this to how bad those nasty conservatives are. So those are those folks, right? And my point is that side, the left, far left orthodoxy, has enough people contributing to it, and its momentum, that it is kind of coalesced when it matters. And the people on the right who are trying to pull it, at least, and when I say the right, I just would say maybe opposition is a better word. Those people are not coalesced, and not in any meaningful way. So again, look at Brett, Jesse, and James. Like, they're all over the place. They didn't coalesce when it mattered. And I'm not saying that's any of their fault. That's not like an indictment of any of them. But I'm just saying, like, the opposition doesn't know how to do it when it matters. So the example I think of, and I know this is going to sound silly, but all my examples are silly, so it's okay. The question is it relevant? There's this game that I play. It's actually the game that I make money playing, which is pretty cool, but it's a great game. It's called Fallout 76. And the story of this game that you find out is, so basically you were in this Fallout shelter, this vault, when World War III, Armageddon happens, right? And you were in the vault that was like all the best and brightest who, once the war was over and the dust settled, we're going to go out and rebuild the world. And you go out, and it takes place in West Virginia. And what you find out, there's like no people around. You can't find any people, at least not in the first iteration of the game. They added people who came back later, but that's not the point. So you find out that after the bombs dropped, that even though there weren't any bombs that dropped on West Virginia, there was this threat that came about. It was called the scorched plague. It was like this disease basically that created a hive mind, which is funny how ironic that is, given what I'm comparing this to. That anyone who got infected with it would basically become subservient to this kind of hive mind type thing. And the scorched plague started to spread all around Appalachia. And you find these like holotapes and notes and computer entries from the various factions of people that kind of came up from that weren't in the vaults, and who, after total chaos broke out, that, you know, people obviously formed these factions and tribes, right? And so it's funny, the elites became like these raiders, who were just total savages. And there was this group called the responders, who were basically like the fire and rescue and the police and the paramedics and stuff. They created their own faction called the responders. There's like the remnants of the US government that forms this faction. There's this group of like super libertarians called the Free Staters, that they have their own faction. And there's one other. Oh, and then there's this group called like the Brotherhood of Steel, that's like a section of the US military. The point is that there's all these different factions, and they all have you find out, it's kind of tragic throughout the course of the game as you're playing, that they all had a piece of what was required to defeat this scorched plague that was destroying everything. They all had a piece of it. So some people came up with some way of tracking it. Some people came up with what appeared to be a cure. Some people had the proper military strength and access to stuff to try and fight this stuff back. There's all these different things, but they didn't trust each other, and they didn't work together when they needed to. And so they all fell. All of these factions fell one by one to the scorched plague, until there was none of them were left, even though they all had a piece of it. And so when I talk about this idea of synthesis, is that it feels like there are all these people who are opposing far-left orthodoxy, but it feels like they all have one hand on a different part of the elephant, and they're not coalescing in a way that I think is necessary to fight this, to fight the left right now, to fight flow. And so we have the numbers game thing that I just laid out. And then it's like, okay, but then also on the more macro level, how do we get the people who are actually kind of leading the drive here to coalesce in a way that matters? Because the left can do it. AOC and Nancy Pelosi on the same page, right? Jesse Singal, who's opposed all this stuff, it will still vote that way and vote in the crazies when it mattered. And so I'm saying that we have to figure out how to coalesce when it matters as well. So there's all these numbers problems and opposition problems that I'm just trying to lay out and think about, and trying to also think about our timetable here. Like, what do we think the country is going to look like in a few years? Here's another way to think about it. How many more illegitimate, like elections that are viewed as illegitimate by the loser, I'm saying on the left or right, how many more of those can we even tolerate as a country? Like, what's our breaking point for elections where you have 70, 80, 90 million people who, because our population keeps increasing, who feel like that they lost illegitimately? What if the right loses not just the midterms in 2022, but they also lose the presidency again in 2024? How sustainable is that? It doesn't seem sustainable to me. That's my point. So I'm also thinking about this in terms of like, okay, how can we address these issues? And also, what's our timetable for hitting the point where it's not going to matter anymore, and things are going to be too far gone? And I know that sounds apocalyptic, guys. I know, but tell me where the flaw is. I want to hear it. I want to know. So I'll leave it there. Tell me what your thoughts are on that. Again, I'm sorry that I've been sucky about putting stuff out there. This thing that I wrote a couple of years ago, like I said, I'll go through and look at it, and I'll put that up there. Just, it might interest you. It's got some kind of fun facts in it, and it's cool to see where the things that I was thinking about a few years ago, where does that overlap with where I'm at now, so on and so forth. Because I've definitely evolved on a lot of things, but what I see as the core problem, not necessarily. And I am going to record a few audio essays. That is happening. Okay, I'm doing that because there's some stuff I want to put out there. And part of the reason why I think I've been sulking is there's this stuff that I've worked really hard on, and there's a part of me that's like, does it even matter? Does it even matter anymore? Like, are we too far gone? Are facts and like reframing things and trying to apply like an objective look at this stuff, are we past the point where that's even effective? I don't know. But I've worked my ass off on some stuff, and it's just hard to be like, does this even matter? But I'm going to start putting that out there because I got to get in motion, right? Object in motion stays in motion. The world is not a great place, but it is worth fighting for. Even if, like if you watch the Ember conversation yesterday, I think Carlin, worded it very well, where it's like, even if we're doomed to fail, even if we're doomed to lose, we still have to fight with our dying breath. And I think that's right. I think that's true. So anyway, I'm sorry that I've been sulky little bitch, but I'm gonna pump the brakes on that as best I can. So, all right, that's it. Please give me your feedback. I'm interested in your thoughts on all this. This community and the people who subscribe to me have always given me like really good feedback and good thoughts, and so I want to hear it. If this kind of thing you're into, please follow me on Twitter. That's at My Mundane Mind. I'll be there till they kick me off. On YouTube, Return to Reason, and then the best place to find me is Locals, which is returntoreason.locals.com. And then I'll post stuff on Medium, but I'll put links to it on those other places, or at least on my Twitter and on my Locals. Obviously, can't do that on YouTube. So, all right, that's it. And I will, well, thank you for watching, and I will check you later. Peace.